Thank you. Good evening and welcome everyone to this meeting of the Western Area Planning Committee, especially those members of the public who are watching the streaming online. I'm Clive Hooker, Chairman of this Planning Committee. The members of the committee joining me this evening are Councillors Adrian Abbs, Dennis Bennyworth, Phil Barnett, Jeff Cant, Caroline Culver, Jeff Beck, Martha Vickers and Howard Wollaston. The officers attending and presenting the applications to the committee this evening are Simon Till, Sean Cutts and Patrick Harron, our planning officers, Paul Goddard, our highways engineer, and Sharon Armour will be my legal advisor this evening. Jack Karimi will act as clerk. I'm also assisted by Tom Dunn, who will be the Zoom host this evening. Before we start the meeting, I'd like to explain for the benefit of those watching that it is being held both via Zoom and with councillors present here in the chamber. The meeting is also being live streamed on YouTube, so the public are able to follow our proceedings. Please can I ask everyone present in the meeting area to make sure that they switch on their microphones when invited to speak directly into them, and to switch them off when finished. Can I please ask that everyone in the chamber to put your mobile phones on silent or turn them off, and turn off the sound on your laptops, everyone. Regarding our safety, if we hear the fire alarm, we must leave the building immediately. Please leave via the safe emergency exit route, which will be shown to us by the trained officers present. Please follow any instructions given by those officers. The assembly point is the Dolphin car park just over the road. If the lockdown alarm sounds, we will remain seated and await instructions from the officers. I will then adjourn the meeting until such time as it is safe to proceed. To be consistent with our council meetings, I'd like to remind members that we are subject to the council's code of conduct, which requires us to uphold certain standards, those being respectful to each other and to officers and to the members of the public. Members may not always agree with one another or with the officer's recommendations, but I would ask that in any disagreements, we are always respectful of others' views and position. So we now move on to item 1 of the agenda, apologies. So Mr. Creamy, do we have any apologies, please?
Thank you, Chairman. We've received apologies from Councillors Tony Vickers and Claire Rolls, and Councillors Martha Vickers and Jeff Beck are here as substitutes.
Thank you very much. Members, we now move on to item 2 of the agenda. That's to approve the minutes of our last meeting, which was held on the 20th of July 2020. Members, have we any observations of those minutes, please? Hands up if you do. Thank you. No observations. Then I'd like to propose that those minutes are a true record of that meeting that took place on the 20th of July, and I have a second with Councillor Abbs. Thank you. All those in favour, please raise your hands. Abstention due to not being in attendance of that meeting. Therefore, those minutes are approved, and I will sign them. Thank you. Now move on to item 3 of the agenda. This is declarations of interest. Members, do we have any declarations of interest? Members first, please. Councillor Abbs.
Yeah, the second application we'll consider this evening is within my ward, but I can consider it like any other application on the evidence presented this evening.
Thank you. Councillor Barnett.
I'm a member of Newburytown Council and also Newburytown Council Planning Highways Committee, where both the items that we're discussing tonight have been discussed, whereas tonight I will weigh up all the evidence before making my decision.
Thank you, Councillor Barnes. No more declarations of interest from officers there for members. Oh, Councillor Beck.
I also am a member of Newburytown Council.
Could you turn your microphone on, please, Councillor Beck? That's it.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Right, thank you. I also am a member of Newburytown Council, and both of these items we're discussing this evening came before the Newburytown Council Planning and Highways Committee. but similar to Councillor Barnett, I will review the presentations and make up my mind afresh this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. No more members. Thank you. And now any declarations of interest, please, from officers? Mr. Till. Sorry, if you could just, yeah, okay. Yeah, but raise your hands. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, just to reiterate what Councillor has said, application 2 is the ward I represent alongside Councillor Jeff Beck.
Thank you. So I have, first, I'll take Mr. Goddard.
Thank you, Chairman.
Turn the volume down.
It's turned off on the laptop. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm declaring an interest because I know the applicants, have worked with them both for a number of years. There are no highway implications with this planning application. Therefore, I am staying in the room on that basis.
This is on item 1.
Item 1, sorry, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mrs. Armour.
Yeah, very similar to Mr. Goddard. For item 1, I've worked with both applicants for 11 Valley Road, but I do not consider that I'm prevented from advising on that item.
Thank you. Mr. Till.
Thank you, Chairman. I have to declare an interest in item 1. I know the applicants on a professional and personal basis, so I will actually be leaving the chamber while this item is considered.
Thank you. And Councillor Abbs, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I said item 2, but I meant item 1.
Okay, thank you for that correction. Okay, so I will just hold the meeting while Mr. Till leaves the chamber. So members, we'll now move on to item 4 of the agenda. These are our planning applications. And this evening, we just have the 2 to consider, although there are 3 on our agenda. The 2 are application number 22/01566. This is 11 Valley Road. And application number 22/01643. This is the Stony Lane Turnpike Newbury Telecoms Tower. Application number 21/03083. This is the land adjacent to the M4 on the Membury airfield. That has been deferred very late this afternoon, but this is due to matters arising from the ecologist consultation observations, and that will come to committee at the next convenient time. So for the benefit of those attending in person or watching online and unfamiliar with the meeting's format, I will now briefly outline the process for each application. The officers will present the application to the committee. The drawings, site plans, and any deemed relevant material submitted on the planning file will be shown as part of their presentation on the screens in the chamber and on your tablets and laptops at home. I will then invite the representatives from the following groups to come to the lectern in front, or I will ask Mr. Dunn to invite them into the meeting on Zoom to present their case to the committee. Each group will have a total of 5 minutes to speak. The order of the presentations will be first the town or parish council, then any objectors, then any supporters, and then the agent or the applicant. On conclusion of these applications, or those submissions, I will ask the committee if they have any questions of clarification on that submission. Members of the committee will not be permitted to introduce new material in their questions. Then I'll invite the ward member to speak. They will have 5 minutes also to present their case. Committee members then will have the opportunity to ask questions of them on conclusion of their presentation. The committee members will then have opportunity to ask questions of clarification of the officers' presentations. The committee will then debate the application and vote on the decision. So members, we move on to the first application this evening, and this is 22/01566. This is 11 Valley Road at Newbury, and this is for the proposed single-storey rear extension, replacing the existing PVC conservatory and the construction of a single rear kitchen extension. This, for the benefit of those watching, has come to committee due to the applicant being a West Berks Council employee. The officer to present this evening is Mr. Harron. Mr. Harron.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. So yes, this is the, as the Chair suggests, obviously sets out the applicant as the council employee. The recommendation is for approval. This is the site outlined there in purple. It's to the south of Newburytown Centre, in an existing residential area. This is the site outlined in red. The application site is a two-storey semi-detached property. Members can see the application. There's a conservatory here, which is to be demolished. And there's an existing flat-roofed single-storey extension, which is a photo of the conservatory, and you can see the extension at the bottom there. So effectively, the application proposes to remove the existing conservatory and to pull the wall out. The existing walls are shown dotted or dashed here. And this is the conservatory, and effectively the conservatory goes, the rear wall gets pulled out and effectively becomes a single-storey rear extension. So the existing plans, I think one of the interesting, but clearly within the conservatory, the space is not easily navigated necessarily. So I think one of the ideas is that there will be an open plan living room, kitchen, diner generally. There are some roof lights proposed. These roof lights are now shown on these. This is the first floor plan, the existing first floor plan, and the proposed first floor plan. And on the top are existing elevations, where you can see the conservatory and the existing extension. And at the bottom is the proposed extension. This is a side elevation. And you can see that there's a mono-pitched roof with some roof lights just sitting above. And this is the front elevation. So the roof rises slightly above the existing roof line and above the existing single-storey extension along the side. So the main issues really are the principle of development, which is established within the defined settlement boundary of Newbury. The impact on the character of the area. So as I've set out there, the house extensions SPD recognise that extensions to the rear are the least likely to have a major impact on the house and surroundings. The site is well enclosed to the rear, but as the previous slide showed, there would be some glimpsed views available above the garage, but these are not considered to be of materially significant. And residential amenity is another consideration. But once again, there's the existing conservatory and existing wall are outlined, dashed. The extension will be 1 metre deeper on the existing wall, and approximately over the side here, 410 millimetres deeper than the existing conservatory. However, the existing conservatory has a solid wall presenting to the neighbouring property, and the slightly increased depth compared to the existing situation is not considered to significantly exacerbate impacts on that property. So in conclusion, officers are satisfied that the proposal would not demonstrably harm the amenity of adjoining residential properties or the character of the area, and therefore accords with national policy and local policies. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Harron. We now come on to the presentation of our attendees this evening. And first up is the Town Council. And we have this evening Councillor Foote. Councillor Foote, come and join us. Nice to see you again, sir. Regular attender these last few meetings.
Thank you very much, Chair. I've really no comments to add other than the comments we made at the time, which members of this committee will have in the papers for this this application. But I'd be very happy to answer any questions that members may have. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Foote. Members, any questions of Councillor Foote? No questions, Councillor. Thank you very much. So we now move on. We have no objectors here this evening. We have no supporters and we have no agents. So the only ward member I have is Councillor Abbs. I don't know whether Councillor Abbs would like to say anything on this.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind saying just a few words, if that's okay. Do you want me to just, I don't need the full 5 minutes, but by all means, start the timer. I'm going to do this sitting down as that's all right. This is a beautiful area that we're talking about, and it has much to commend family living, the extension that's being offered here. So I find myself, if we saw more of these type of things, I think we would enhance family life within the ward, and I'm keen to encourage that type of thing. There are some things that I'll point out during debate that I think would have been slightly better. And that's mainly to do with the information giving to us as members to do with shadowing and this and that and the other. But in general, I don't, there's very little to say against the application. And I think the only reason it's before us this evening is we are doing our due diligence because it's a council employee making the application. And that's right that we should look at those. So that's it really.
Thank you, Councillor. Members, any questions of Mr. Harron's presentation, our planning officer this evening? Any questions of Councillor Abbs? No. Thank you. Any questions of Mr. Harron? I see none. Thank you. So now I think it's opening to debate. Who'd like to start? Councillor Abbs, no doubt.
Thanks very much. I was going to avoid that for once. But, yeah, as I just said, really, there's a lot to commend itself. I would like to have seen, I think I'm basically going to be swayed by the lack of objections from the neighbours. And this could, with that extension of a metre, it doesn't sound a lot, but actually could affect the immunity of the neighbours significantly. But as they have not objected and shown no signs of objecting, then I really don't see why we would wish to apply any more conditions than are already in the application or anything. So I'm sure I'll let debate go on, but I'm really quite happy just to put this forward for approval.
Is that a proposal?
Well, it's up to you, Chairman. I'm quite happy to.
I've got 3-4 minutes. Just keep your powder dry there. I've got Councillor Cant next, please.
Thank you, Chair. Whilst I appreciate the need to bring applications from councillors, from employees of the council forward to this committee, Councillor Abbs is absolutely right. This is an extraordinarily modest extension to a fairly modest house, which seems to be very recently designed, and I guess it would have been swiftly resolved by delegated powers had it not been for the fact that it's an employee. So I'd very much encourage us to move on quickly with the debate and treat it fairly and openly.
Thank you. Councillor Barnett.
Well, as what's already said, it's a lovely area down that part of Valley Road, and some lovely buildings that were made, some were built just before the war and others were sort of modifications or in the 50s and 60s. And this extension, as what's already been said, it's modest, it's facing east, it's not facing on the street scene, and it's very similar to a lot of other extensions to a lot of these other buildings. So I don't know whether the ward member was hoping to put the proposal forward. If not, I'm more than happy to do so.
Thank you. Councillor Beck.
Thank you, Chairman. Should this committee be mindful to actually approve this application, I noticed that there are no hours of work detailed in either the conditions or the informatives. Ought we to address that?
Thank you.
Question to the committee.
And your suggestion on that might be?
That we include the, shall we say, the usual conditions.
Yep. 8 till 5 or
Thank you.
whatever. Yeah, thank you. And finally, I think Councillor Pennyworth.
Thank you, Chairman. Again, very briefly, just to note the lack of letters of representation from both immediate and other neighbours. To my mind, it makes much more sense of the overall building. It brings it together, makes much more livable space, and I'd be happy to support this.
Thank you. Well, members, right from the outset, early on, Councillor Abs indicated, I don't know if he wishes to still propose.
I'd love to propose with Councillor Beck's condition that of the normal hours of work to not disturb the neighbours as much as possible while work is carried out.
Thank you. And I did have a second, I think, with Councillor Barnett. So everybody happy with that? Good. I'll go back to Mr. Harron and to Miss Armour to whether they want to be more precise on the hours of working at this stage, or you can apply the norm. Mr. Harron.
Thank you, Chair. I was under the impression that these hours of work, I mean, planning is advised to restrict to the very least the number of conditions that we impose. And it was my impression, and I don't know whether Paul could help on this, that or Sharon, that the coronavirus regs effectively didn't prohibit us necessarily from restricting hours of work to get Britain building again. So that would be my only comment, and I'm not too sure where we stand on that.
Well, Chairman, the coronavirus.
Mrs. Cutts, you would normally stand in here in the absence, as you are, for Mr. Till, please.
We do have a standard hours of work condition. It's not our normal practice to apply it for house extension type applications in these circumstances. If members are minded to add that condition on, our normal hours are from 7:30 a.m. to 6 p.m. Monday to Fridays, 8:30 a.m. to 1 p.m. on a Saturday, and no work on Sundays or bank holidays. We'd normally apply it perhaps to a new dwelling in a residential area. It's not standard on our house extensions, but if members feel that there is a need for that condition and that it's reasonable, then
that's fine. Thank you. Mrs. Armour's agreement, members, a quick poll, it's been brought up.
I think that the proposer and seconder probably need to comment on what Mrs. Cutts has said and whether they still want the condition or whether they don't.
No, it was brought forward by Councillor Beck, and I'm in support of it because it's such a peaceful area. If there was, and therefore, the amenity of the others is probably more noticeable here than in, say, the centre of town, where there would be lots of street noise and so on. So I would prefer it to stay in. I can't believe anybody, the builder would object to this because it's pretty relaxed anyway.
It's your proposal, so.
I'd rather leave it in if that's okay.
In and agreed with Councillor Beck?
Yes, I will endorse that, Chairman.
I support that.
Okay, so that will go in, members. So thank you. That concludes the debate and the discussion. So I will ask now Mrs. Armour, with that condition to be added and any others within the paperwork. The recommendation is for Head of Planning and Countryside be authorised to grant planning permission on application number 22/01566, 11 Valley Road in Newbury. This is for the proposed single-storey extension and the removal of the PVC conservatory and the development of a kitchen. Mrs. Armour.
Yeah, so those for the proposal, can you raise your hands, please? I think that's unanimous.
Thank you.
So it's approved.
Thank you. That extension, that application is granted. I now have a short adjournment just to allow Officer Simon Till to come back into the meeting. Thank you. Okay, welcome back, Mr. Till. Before we go any further, just a note of clarity from Mrs. Armour, our legal lady this evening. Mrs. Armour.
I was just going to say, I was just saying to the chair that it's actually not all council employees that would come to committee, it's just members of the planning department. So I don't know if that's helpful for members to know that or not.
Whittled the field down a bit anyway. Okay, we all ready for our application number 2. So if you're sitting nice and tidy and tight, here we go. This is application for 22/01643. This is the telecommunications mast at Stony Lane, Turnpike Road in Newbury. And members, this has come to committee due to more than 5 letters of objection, and that is the requirement when it's on West Berkshire Council land, as this is. But I'm sure that Mrs. Cutts will give us a full explanation of this application. Mrs. Cutts, thank you.
Sorry. Thank you, Chairman. This application is seeking a determination of whether prior approval is required for the siting and appearance of a new 15-metre high monopole to support antennae together with equipment cabinets. The application site is at the edge of the footway, which forms part of the junction between Stony Lane and Turnpike Road in this area here. There's a better site plan here showing the pole and the equipment cabinets. The pole has an overall height of 15 metres, which includes, the height includes the antennae and the head frame and the pieces of equipment that form part of the pole. It is proposed to be light grey along with the cabinets. 3 cabinets are also proposed either side. One is 1.7 metres high, one at 1.6 metres high, and one at 1.5 metres to be sited either side, as you can see. And these are the photographs of the site. This is viewed from Turnpike Road from the southwest, and this is another view again, where particularly in this view, it will be screened from these trees. This is a prior approval application with the mast and cabinets both benefiting from permitted development rights. The only matter for consideration is the siting and appearance of the mast itself. The cabinets are permitted development and do not require any further approval. In terms of the consultations, there have been no objections from the highways officers or environmental health. Newburytown Council have objected as set out in the report, as they consider it should require full planning application, that the proposal does not accord with the code of practice for wireless network development or the MPPF, that the colour should be green, there should be more camouflaging and consideration of mitigation such as fencing A further consultation has taken place in environmental health about the potential noise from the cabinets as set out in the update sheet. The noise from such cabinets, and they confirmed that the noise from such cabinets has never been the subject of a complaint. It's not particularly loud or intrusive, and so is not typically raised as a concern in this type of proposal. A condition has been suggested if necessary. However, members need to be aware that the cabinets themselves are permitted development and not part of the consideration of the application. So it's unlikely that condition would meet the tests set out within the NPPF and in the legislation. There have been objections from 5 contributors. These are summarised within the report as follows. The concerns about overbearing, not being in keeping with the surroundings, 3 times taller than surrounding bungalows, twice the height of the lamppost, distraction to road users, obscuring sight lines on Stony Lane, that it's a dangerous location for installation and maintenance purposes, detrimental to the visual amenities of nearby residential properties, the impacts on health. Other sites nearby, such as the industrial sites, would be more appropriate with similar coverage, devaluation of property, increased risk of lightning strikes, the potential for cabinets to attract graffiti. Other Mast sites generate unacceptable and consistent noisy hum, shadowing to the adjacent residential property, difficult to maintain the boundary. It does not comply with the code of practice for wireless network development in England. The colour should be green and not grey, and there should be fencing to disguise the cabinet. The agent has also responded to the objections as has been set out and summarised in the update sheet. These comments can be summarised as the NPPF makes reference to health considerations that are different to the ICNIRP certification shouldn't be considered. The height of the mast has been kept to a minimum to provide service and also be viable. There's only a small site selection area due to the needs of the operators. There is other street furniture and the site search area is residential. Whilst other sites have been considered site, but actually in this instance, this site is the best in land use planning terms. The height proposed at 15 metres is below the 20 metres, which is actually the permitted development height. Mobile data usage is at an all-time high following changes to the way work, business and social life takes place after COVID. They've also provided a set of appeal decisions which have showed various places where 20-metre high poles have been allowed also in residential areas. They point out that whilst the mast will be visible, there will be a number of benefits and therefore should not be considered to be harmful. Moving on to the appraisal of the application, as set out in the report, the principle of the mast is established through permitted development rights, and this application is seeking prior approval of the siting and appearance of the mast only. The NPPF advises that planning authorities should support the rollout of the next generation of technology and should not question the need for the equipment. In taking into account the siting, the update sheet has included a list of alternative sites. Now on this wider location plan, if I highlight this little dot here is where the application site actually is. The list of sites includes places along Gaywood Drive, Hopwood Close, and Avon Way along here, and also Wyndham Road up here. So it is a very tight search area that they were looking at. As you'll see from the update sheet, that sets out various reasons why the sites can be considered, such as the restrictions to pedestrian access on the footways, and those kinds of matters, and visibility. Now, in terms of what members can consider, the planning considerations for the siting are ensuring matters such as unrestricted pedestrian access on footways, taking into account the need for people with disabilities, making sure that private and public rights of access are not obstructed, and ensuring highway safety. As I'm sure our highways officer will confirm that there were no objections with regards to the siting in terms of pedestrian access and visibility at the junction. In terms of appearance, the location at the back of the footway also minimise the impact in terms of space and appearance within the street scene. There have been objections about the siting in a residential area. However, the mast is required to provide increased coverage to people within their homes, given the increased demands on the network for increased levels of home working and use for social interactions. The proximity to the adjacent hedge and concern about access for maintenance at the boundary would be a private matter between the mast owner and the landowner. So in terms of appearance, the planning considerations in this case are minimising the visual impact on the setting, such as siting close to features such as trees and mature hedging and other features in the street. We consider things like colour and camouflaging of the equipment. In this instance, there are street lamps of 6 metres in height around the junction, as you can see here. And they are also painted grey. In this instance, a slimline pole has been proposed with the antennae arranged vertically around the top in a compact manner. The grey colour of the mast will blend against the sky and blend with the lamppost colour. However, should members feel that a different colour is more appropriate, then this could be the subject of a condition. In proposing this site and putting this proposal together, the developers have considered the visual impact by not utilising their full permitted development rights for 20 metres. They have indicated that 15 metres in height is the lowest height that they can provide the adequate level of coverage with. So they can't reduce it any further down without affecting the overall coverage. The site is close to the trees, which will help to filter views and minimise the overall height within the street scene. Whilst other cabinets within the Turnpike Road area are commonly painted green, the grey colour proposed will also, in this instance, provide a coherent scheme with the mast and the cabinets all being similar colour. Objections have referred to potential fencing to try and screen some of this. However, this would require a separate planning application and would also increase the space taken up on the footway to enable access into the cabinets. And so it is not possible within the scope of this application to require require fencing to screen the site. There have been objections raised about potential impacts. The MPPF makes very clear that planning authorities must not set health guard standards which are different to the International Commission guidance on non-ionising radiation. A certificate has been submitted with this application to demonstrate that the site will comply with these standards. In conclusion, the application is seeking prior approval for the siting and appearance of the mast. There have been no objections from highways to the location of the mast and cabinets to pedestrian and highway safety. The mast has been designed to minimise the visual impact as far as is practical by minimising the height to the lowest practical height to provide the coverage required and to use a slimline design. Whilst the mast will be visible in the street scene from Stony Lane and Turnpike Road, as well as some of the residential properties, It will be seen as part of the street furniture and will provide benefits to local residents through increased connectivity of 5G coverage. These are important social and economic benefits and are supported by NPPF guidance. These benefits are considered to outweigh the harm which is caused by additional visibility of the mast. And in this instance, the sighting and appearance are considered to be acceptable and the details are recommended for approval. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mrs. Cutts, for your presentation. Mr. Goddard, would you like to present any highways issues you have?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I'll try again. That's better. Thank you, Chairman. The proposal is on land that is public highway. It's not unusual to have kiosks, cabinets, masts, poles within land that is public highway, and I see nothing unusual about this particular proposal before you. The proposal is to be placed on what is footway, but it's a corner, it's an area of footway that is seldom used to walk upon, and therefore we consider that the proposal will not restrict or obstruct or narrow the pedestrian thoroughfare in any particular way. The proposal was also next to the mini roundabout junction. It will not, considering where it's tucked in, it will not obstruct any sight lines around that junction. And therefore, on all those points, your highway officers raised no objection. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Goddard. We now come to the presentations of our attendees.
You may all mute on Zoom. Thank you. I have just muted you.
Thank you. So now we move on to our attendees. And again, first up is Newburytown Council, Councillor Foote. Councillor.
Thank you very much, Chair. Could I just begin by explaining I was not available to go on the site visit last week. My colleague, Vice Chair at Newburytown Council Planning and Highways, Councillor Gary Norman, went on that site visit. Unfortunately, Councillor Norman has been ill and indisposed, and so I've been permitted to substitute for him tonight. So just to make that clear to members of the committee, and thank you for allowing me to speak. Yes, as the Chair has pointed out and has already been explained, this application came before Newburytown Council, and at that meeting, we felt that this application should require a full planning application. We felt that it does not meet the Code of Practice for Wireless Network Development in England, a document published in 2022, that it did not comply with the National Planning Policy Framework, and we felt that the grey colour is out of character and a green colour for this mast would be more appropriate. And referring back to the Code of Practice for Wireless Network Development in England, on page 7 of that document, it states only masts where existing infrastructure cannot be used are permitted to be installed. We have no knowledge from Hutchinson's telecommunication whether existing infrastructure would be appropriate in this instance. It goes on to say that consultation should take place with local planning authorities, local communities, and other stakeholders, such as highways authorities, as we've just heard, in areas of outstanding natural beauty, historic England, natural England, and including pre-application discussions where appropriate. It states operators should maintain clear procedures and high quality communication and consultation with local communities and other interested parties. Operators should agree community engagement with local planning authorities and share information as appropriate. And I would like to mention to members of this committee that this did not happen with the 5G mast, as far as I'm aware, that was installed at Link Road and St John's Road. We at Newburytown Council requested a presentation from Hutchinson's Telecom as to why that mast had to go in that position. We received no response from them at all, and the next we knew was when the mast was actually being installed. I would also like to bring to members of this committee's attention a press release, a government press release from the Department of Digital, Culture, Media and Sport, and also with the Department of Levelling Up Housing and Communities, dated 7th of March 2022, on 5G masts. And it states, and I quote, "Mobile operators will still need to obtain agreement from the landowner before building any new infrastructure. All new ground-based masts will also need to be approved by local planning authorities, which will continue to have a say on where they are placed and their appearance." So I'd just like to bring that to the attention of the members of the committee tonight. So in conclusion, I feel this committee does have a duty to bear in mind the concerns of residents in this area and pay due regard to that statement that was published, the press release, on the 7th of March. And I'd be very happy to answer any questions members may have. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Foote. Members, any questions of Councillor Foote, please? A lot of information there. No questions, Councillor. Thank you very much. We now move on to our objectors, and this evening we have Mr. Softly, who's come to join us. So, welcome, sir. Thank you for coming along this evening and showing your interest in this application. Now, first time up for you this to the committee. The situation, as I mentioned earlier, you have 5 minutes.
No pressure then.
From the start, and I will give you an indication that you've got a minute to go, and then finally I'll say, and in conclusion, that will give you an indication. You've got 10 seconds just to wind up, and then I'll say, that's it, sir. Okay, so when you're ready, we're looking forward to hearing from you.
Fair enough. Thank you very much for letting me speak tonight. My name is John Softly. I live in number 6 Turnpike Road, which is immediately opposite where this mast is going to be. I'm not an NIMBY. I use the technology regularly myself and understand that we need to have these things put in. However, I do think they should follow a certain, follow at least the government's own code of practice, which has already been mentioned tonight, which is this one here. A very handy document, I think, from my point of view as well, because it does highlight what considerations should be taken into account. And based on my review of that and the other documents that we saw earlier, the items that lead me to believe this should go through the full approval process. Basically, the code of practice repeats the statement. Paragraph 115 of the National Planning Policy Framework states that where new mobile infrastructure sites are required, the equipment should be sympathetically designed and camouflaged where appropriate. And that wording comes up time and time again. I did whip through and extract a few paragraphs from that document, goes over 2 pages, and that's not all of them. So here we have things like where new mobile infrastructure sites are required to be sympathetically designed. We've got, although operators should make efforts to reduce visual impacts where possible, an application for a new site should also include evidence that the applicant has explored the possibility of erecting antennas on existing buildings and existing mast structures. Anyway, there's lots of that in there. Feel free to have a read in your own time. So what I think really concerns me is that 3 or whoever it is that's actually doing this work have not abided by that code of practice. Even in the update that I got as I walked through the door here, one of the items in response says the applicants consider the least damaging site has been selected. Fair enough, I can't argue that. In this instance, making use of the natural environment, given trees, pedestrian footway, and so on. And I noticed they only show you one photograph, which is where it is hidden behind the tree, is coming from one direction. If you look at the other, from the other side, it will clearly stick out like a sore thumb. If you look from my house, it really will stick out like a sore thumb, but you know, that's neither here nor there. So I do believe that it requires further scrutiny. I also keep hearing this term about its permitted development. Well, in the Code of Conduct, again, it says that not all telecoms development, the benefits from permitted development rights will require prior approval of the local planning authority, fair enough. In these cases, the operator must provide the local planning authority with written notice of its intention to install and a description of the apparatus, which we've seen. The local authority can then exercise they exercise their permitted development within 28 days. Okay. The local planning authority may, within this period, give written notice of conditions with which they wish the operator to comply in respect to the installation of equipment. Operators should respond positively. I don't know if they're here tonight. I'd be a bit miffed if they're not actually here. Respond positively and promptly to any requests for engagement from the local planning authorities. I hope you have done that, and work towards solutions where reasonable concerns, and I think my concerns are reasonable, and I would, have been raised about the proposed development. So finally, for my part, I have a long-term stake in this area.
1 minute, Mr. Softly.
Thank you. I have a long-term stake in this area, having supported local schools, charities. My kids went to school here. 30 years, I have had my company based here, lived in the area myself 35 years, paid all my taxes, you'll be pleased to hear. I would say that. So the one outstanding question for the committee is, what have you done to protect the best interests of the residents affected by this and other similar installations? And I hope you are paying attention to the fact that permitted development doesn't necessarily mean they can run roughshod over these installations. Aside from that, I don't know if I'm allowed to mention that. Yep, okay. Number 2, Stony Lane, in his deeds, says he still owns the land. So there may be a question about whether or not the land is actually owned by the council. And I think you will need to address that. And maybe that comes up in the planning permission. So he was at the site meeting where he referenced that.
He was. Thank you very much. Before you go, Mr. Stoneley, we might have some questions for you. Members, Councillor Abbs is certainly interested.
Yeah, thanks very much. A couple of things you mentioned, one of which was the alternate locations. I've heard this mentioned by the officers earlier as well. Do you know what alternate locations?
If you were to bring up the map, I don't know if that's possible.
Can we do that for him?
That street map. A little further down the road. Well, first of all,
Kurtz, could you bring the map up, please? Yeah, thank you.
Just give us a second.
Yes.
Right.
Oh, that's it. That back one. Yeah. That's the one. Thank you.
Oh, well, but there is a map also that I think shows.
Oh, the map of the town.
The map that showed the other sites. They would.
There we are. That
go.
one. Yeah.
Right.
I'm going to have to point, I'm afraid. So there is a site over here which is has some similar land over here, which would mean fewer residential properties would be affected by putting it over here. Not terribly far from here, as you can see. There are also existing masts up by the fields here, and other operators have been able to put their masts up there. Again, short stroll up here would be an alternative that I think would be worth considering. To be perfectly honest, I think from the point of view of the height of the mast, I'm less concerned about that. I'd rather have it as far away from me as possible.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
Sorry.
I'm slightly confused. Are we or are we not?
Put your microphone on, please.
Are we or are we not in a position to consider the siting of the mast, or is it something that is granted to the the mast erectors by Act of Parliament. I'm getting, we seem to be drifting into a debate about where they might alternatively go.
Maybe this is a question we can put
Yes,
to
that's
Mrs.
right.
Cutts when we're.
So rather than have a debate about that, I'd
Yeah,
rather.
okay, we'll put that to Mrs. Cutts. Questions to the officer. Thank you. Councillor Rhodes.
Yeah, thank you. You didn't mention Pear Tree House and that industrial estate. You only mentioned the Grass Valley broadcast. Did you intend to mention both industrial estates, or is it just was there a reason why you didn't mention the other one?
Not particularly, it didn't come up originally from.
Okay, I was just curious. So
the occupier of number 2 had raised that as
okay, it will come up in debate, I'm sure. The only other thing that you said, I'm obviously you've said you'll like the process to be followed properly, and I get that. I kind of agree with that. Process should be.
Mr. Sully, could you put your mic on, please?
Yeah.
Thank you.
I am curious though, is if we were minded to approve, what is the number one thing that you think we need to take account of?
I think
number 1 and 2, shall we say?
2. I think get the colour right, because it's. I think again we're hearing but cabinets of permitted development. But doesn't this document say that even under permitted development you can challenge or set a condition? So I would say those cabinets and the mast should all be a shade of green that matches the trees in the background. Okay, so I'm going to have to live with this, and it would. That's one. Okay, number 2. It also talks about camouflage in several instances. At the eye line of pedestrians and car drivers, it would make sense to put a low-level slatted fence around. And because of the sort of shape of this ground, there is space to do that without actually stopping people walking around the pavement. Because the pavement, the old width of the pavement is there, and there's plenty of space to put a small fence up there that would just take away, camouflage the impact of that being there on people walking there and also cycling and driving.
Thank you, Mr. Sutherland.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Beck, did you have your hand up? You tend to put your hand up as opposed to. Did you have your hand up early on? No questions. Okay, thank you. Members, any more questions of Mr. Sutherland? Mr. Sutherland, thank you for your presentation.
Okay.
Members, we've no supporters here this evening, and as Mr. Sutherland said, I think Mr. Till did make, Mr. Cutts did make representation to the applicant and agent, and they have not responded this evening. So,
Chairman, may a point of information for myself. Can we, as a Western Area Planning, write to them saying how disappointed we are that they are not here? Are we allowed to do that?
Mrs. Cutts. Mr. Till. Indeed. Mr. Till.
Chairman, the council can make representations on behalf of members. Should members wish to provide officers with those, we can pass them on.
Thank you. Any other observations? The only thing I would say, Mr. Sutherland did mention the gentleman. What did I say? Okay, Mr. Soft, sorry. On the site meeting, the gentleman who owns the property behind the hedge where this is going to be possibly situated did come out, and the issue that Mr. Softly mentioned about the ownership of that land, I did question him on that at the site meeting, and hopefully the members that attended picked this up. But on the land registry, although he thought when he bought the property, he owned a bit of land there, but when he looked on the land registry, he didn't own it. So I hope that helps. But that was only the information I've got from the site meeting. I don't want to go into discussion now, but that's fine. Thank you. So now we come on to the ward member, Councillor Beck, and I'm sure we're all quite happy for Councillor Beck to make his presentation from the seated position there. Councillor Beck.
Members of the committee.
Sorry, could you put your councillor? Could you put your mic on, please? Thank you very much.
Start again. Chairman and members of committee, I am opposed to the officer's recommendation of approval. You have heard from Councillor Foote of Newburytown Council and John Softly, a resident who lives opposite to this proposed site. In my view, this proposed erection of a 15-metre in height pole plus any other equipment that may be added at a later date, not necessarily initially when this pole is first put up, if it gets permission. The permission which is in the papers allows Hutchinson to actually put, in a sense, whatever they like on this pole whenever they want in the future. And that could be a dish, which is very much in your eyesight. There we go. If this goes ahead, it will definitely have a very severe impact upon number 2 Stony Lane, as has been brought to our attention, and 6 Turnpike Road and surrounding properties. Despite the comments in the update report, the potential varying decibel level of noise emanating from the proposed control cabinets could prove to be extremely disturbing to the residents, especially of number 2 Stony Lane and nearby properties. This information was passed to me by a telecoms radio engineer who has many years of experience of these matters, and in particular has experienced situations of the fluctuating decibel levels causing considerable disturbance to residents. On account of the potential adverse impact of this proposed development, I recommend committee members to refuse the application and request Hutchinson 3G Limited to look for other alternative sites. There are 2 industrial sites nearby that could quite possibly accommodate the required development without having such an impact on the community. The nearby Castle Industrial Estate, in particular, should be investigated. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Beck. Members, any questions of Councillor Beck's presentation? No? Thank you. Members, it's now our opportunity to ask questions of Mrs. Cutt's presentation. Any clarification considering Mr. Softly's comments as well? No. How about Mr. Goddard? Anything on highways issues? Sorry. Oh, I have got some. I do apologise. When I looked, it was clear. Right, Councillor Abs, first in. Thank you. This is for
the planning officer, I believe. Yes. The thing that I'm missing some information here, and it was missing the presentation. I don't know where all the other maths are from all the other suppliers, so I can't really judge, and I also can't judge where the next Hutchinson 5G mast is either. So I'm being asked to look at this in isolation, and I do know that these masts need to be relatively close together. But it's very difficult for me to judge whether another site is viable or inviable because I just don't have the information to make. So do you have any other information that you can share with us about the locations of Hutchinson equipment and other suppliers that might be relevant to our deliberation?
Okay, I don't have a full detail of all the masts and all the coverage within the area. However, I do appreciate your concern about where the other sites are going and where other things may fit together. However, what we are looking at tonight is this individual mast within this location and whether the siting and appearance of this particular one is acceptable. The MPPF, which is the planning guidance that we as the planning authority need to follow, does say that local planning authority shouldn't question the need for a particular mast in a location. And so whilst I understand your concern about proliferation, at this stage, we are just looking at this particular application now.
But obviously, you specifically said we are here to debate whether or not this is a suitable location, and how can I judge that if I don't know where the rest are? I don't have the parameters on which to make a decision. So I'll come back. I've got another question, but I see there's lots of other hands up as well. So let someone else take the floor.
Mr. Till, did you like to add to Mrs. Cutt's response?
Thank you, Chairman. Sean, Mrs. Cutts has in part covered what I was going to say. Citing in particular in respect of consideration of telecommunications masts is somewhat of a confusing term when we're dealing with permitted development rights. And I think as a point of clarity, it might help to talk about need as being a separate, distinct thing from siting in this particular case. So there are reasons why we may have concerns about siting in terms of obstruction of visibility displays, obstruction of emergency access, for example, about a very specific siting for mobile telecommunications equipment. We're not being asked to consider coverage, which is what many people might think siting refers to. So we're not being asked to identify whether there is a gap in the mobile telecommunications network that needs filling by putting a mast in this particular location. We have to take that as read, and that is the business of the telecommunications operator to identify in terms of fulfilling the need of the network themselves. I hope that helps, Chairman.
Thank you. I will let Councillor Abs come back on that as his question. Thank you.
Thanks very much. And I wasn't questioning the coverage. That's the, you know, although that's an element of this, I was really thinking about the amenity. And are you saying that we cannot judge location on the amenity effect?
Thank you, Chairman. In terms of amenity, there are considerations in terms of visual amenity that relates to appearance. That is not part of siting, but if the concerns in respect of amenity, for instance, are of overshadowing due to the location of a mast, then potentially that could be a consideration. But members, you would have to be satisfied that you would be talking about a significant degree of overshadowing, such as we would be talking about in terms of a residential development, for instance, where there was a concern that a property, for instance, would lose a significant amount of light to its rear windows through the course of the day. I think in the case of a mast, it would be difficult to say that a significant amount of overshadowing would be generated.
Thank you, Mr. Till. Councillor Camp.
Thank you, Chair. And I must say I have considerable sympathy with Mr. Softly and his neighbours' wish not to have a 50-foot mast suddenly appear in their line of sight. And I'm very sympathetic. But I think to some extent, Simon has clarified this. The actual advantage and disadvantage of having a mast in a particular site is not for us to decide or to consider. It's not within our purview, as I understand it. Simon, is that right? Yeah, I'll just, I've got another question. If Simon could just answer that one. Just to clarify that, Simon, we aren't in a place to say that should not be the site on which this mast is placed.
I think in terms of the general location, it isn't something that you're being asked to consider, whether the location of a mast picked by preference for the network coverage is appropriate. In terms of the specific location, i.e. within 10 metres of the street corner or not.
You go back to your previous answer, which is a blocking access, impedance. That's
yes, those matters are
but not the specific. Okay, the second thing is a number of references have been made to compliance with the code of practice. And I'm just need some clarity personally that again is or isn't within our purview. The compliance with the code of practice presumably isn't policed by us. It's not our.
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Camp, that's correct. The code of practice is a code for the network providers. It isn't a material planning consideration in terms of consideration of a notification. We have to, once again, assume that the operator is complying with the code of practice as one of their conditions of operation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Councillor Culver.
Thank you, Chairman. I just want to point out, first of all, in point 1.1, it talks about the fact that we're seeking a determination whether prior approval is required, and yet we're told it's permitted development. So sometimes I find the way that these things are worded slightly confusing. I would ask, is it permitted development because there's already been telecommunications kit in that area? I think at the site visit, we could see that on the ground, there were some markings out from previous kit. So if I could have a response to that. And also about whether or not it can be green, because I'm conscious that the one at Link Road is silver. Have we given conditions to any other masts around here that they should be green? Is that something that we are able to do?
Who would like to answer that, Mrs. Cutts or Mr. Tell?
I can answer that. Okay. In terms of the first question about it being permitted development, the general permitted development order sets out that mobile phone masts up to 20 metres in height are in this location. It's not in the OMB or a site of special scientific interest, has a permitted development right, subject to a condition that they apply to the planning authority for approval of the siting and appearance. They apply to the planning authority for an opinion as to whether the siting and appearance need to be approved. Given the objections, we're saying the siting and appearance need to be approved, and that's what members are being asked to do this evening, is to approve. We've got all the details of the siting and appearance, so we're asking members to approve those details. Does that provide clarification?
Yeah, thank you, Mrs. Cutts. And then just the question about whether it's possible to say that it should be green. Have we made that a condition on any of the other masks locally?
I haven't dealt with one where that has been done. However, I would say that it is certainly within the remit for members tonight to request a different colour. That's certainly within the remit. If members feel that that's appropriate, we can condition that.
Thank you. Now we move on to Councillor Barnett. Thank you.
It was a question to Paul Gollard, if I can. Is that okay, Chairman? Mr. Gollard, I know we're talking specifically about this application in front of us tonight at Stony Lane and Turnpike Road Junction. But if one looks at the monstrosity that's being built on the A339, or let's say installed by the junction of where the Northern Avenue leads into the A339, that has necessitated the A339 to be restricted in the only down to one lane. It's obviously had to have large, heavy equipment to install it. In the last week or so, it's been restricted, the access into the junction at Robin Hood. And therefore, I'm thinking if this goes ahead at this particular junction, it's going to need a considerable amount of construction equipment somewhere housed along Stony Lane, which will restrict Stony Lane, possibly restrict Turnpike Road. And the question for you is, firstly, did you agree that restriction on the A339? And if this goes ahead, will you have to restrict the amount of traffic along the roads that's going to be affected where the installation takes place on this corner?
I don't think you need to answer the question regarding 339, just the one on this.
Thank you, Chairman. Okay, done. Thank you, Chairman. Firstly, I was not aware of the proposed current works in Western Avenue. Should you approve the proposal tonight, it will be installed under licence and the traffic management will be arranged by our street works team, who will, I would consider, make the appropriate conditions and requirements to ensure that any inconvenience will be minimised. There will inevitably be, while the thing's been installed, some inconvenience, but I'm sure they would do everything they can to keep inconvenience to a minimum, in my view.
Thank you, Mr. Goddard. Back to Councillor Abbs.
Yeah, thank you. Second question for Ms. Goods. We have this site and it's on West Berkshire land, and I'm led to believe this is the only site, but what rights do the telecoms operators have? Can they, for instance, say, I'm choosing your garden? What rights do they actually have in terms of saying where they locate stuff? Can they just appropriate anybody's land, or is it has to be council land or something? I mean, what's it's free. Maybe.
It would be up to the developer to seek the permission of the landowner. That in itself is separate to the consideration of the planning commission. So
no, indeed, but you were saying that they've got permitted rights, but you know, again, we're coming back to they've made this statement about, oh yeah, we can we looked at other sites that provided no evidence of, you know, why they brought them in or didn't bring them in. But then I don't understand what permission they have. So could they approach anybody? Are we being paid, for instance, for this land, or are we having to give it for free? Well, what's the scenario here?
I don't think that's a planning issue.
They can ask somebody if they can put it on their land. That can be one of the reasons why a site doesn't get put forward for approval if they haven't got a landowner.
So we could say no.
That would be a matter. I don't know if Paul knows anything. It's a separate matter to the planning commission.
But if other people are
just
able to
specific
say no,
questions, Councillor Abbs.
But I'm trying to get to the do we have the ability as the council to say no?
Maybe Mr. Till can help.
Chairman, it's very important that as the planning committee, we stick to considerations that are within the remit of planning. And the remit of planning doesn't fall to land ownership. It falls only to the matters set out under the legislation. In this case, we're dealing with the General Permitted Development Order. And when we're talking about permitted development rights, I should be specific in giving an explanation of that the order sets out the right for certain forms of development to be carried out without separate planning permission beyond the planning permission that is granted within the order. It doesn't go into land ownership matters, which are still separate from planning permission. And if the council as a landowner chooses to make a decision about its land, that decision would be made outside of this meeting, Councillor Abbs.
Thank you. Councillor Williston.
Thank you, Chairman. It seems to me that the principle of putting this mast up is probably outside our direct remit. But what we can try and do is mitigate the appearance. I'm interested to know whether we can investigate further, whether we could screen these boxes at the bottom. It can't be on the wit of man to have a fence with opening gates so you could actually get to these cabinets. And it might at least, as I say, mitigate some of the appearance.
Thank you. That is a question I will put on your behalf, as it's a general sort of statement here. It's
well, it was a question as well. Is it?
But I think maybe Mr. Goddard, in the first instance, with regards to fencing access and the amount of pavement it will take up, it was touched on in his presentation as to once you put the fence up, you've got to get in and maintain the boxes, which will take space. So it's not just a screen, in my opinion, that will go up close against the boxes. But I'm sure he can answer it better than I can.
Chairman, we've already taken the view that it is quite a tight site and they've got it in out of the way. If you put a fence up round it, then as the chairman has stated, you need to get through the fence and then need to have enough room to open the cabinets up to be able to work inside. We would need to see some plans to see where this fence would go. I would not wish the footway to be narrowed any more than the sections of footway along Kiln Road and Stony Lane to the north. I wouldn't want the pedestrian thoroughfares to be restricted in any way. While a fence sounds like a good idea, it's not possible for me right now to say whether a fence can be provided or whether there's enough highway land to provide one without affecting pedestrians unless they submit some plans. So I think the advice has to be, and I'm sure the planning officers will back me up here, is that the advice is to assess the plans that are put before you tonight.
Thank you. Mrs. Cutts, would you like to come back on the planning issue, please?
Yeah, I think the fencing itself, given the location and the height, would in itself require planning permission. And again, it's beyond the remit of what we can require under the appearance. Whilst I appreciate it is a camouflaging issue, given the additional development that is required, it's not really possible within the scope of this application.
Thank you. Councillor Benioff.
Thank you, Chairman. Following on this point, is there, Mrs. Cutts, is there any possibility of investigating the potential of grading the colour of this mast rather than having a block green or a block grey, block silver, whatever it might be? There are various examples not too far away of buildings and similar structures which have a sort of fading as it goes into the skyline.
It's not something I've come across before, but I think there is a possibility that we could request, perhaps it would be in the wording of a condition, that we request a colour scheme for approval so that we don't if they come back and say it's not feasible to do a grading scheme because of, say, the manufacture process, because I'm not sure if it's the mast is produced in a colour or whether the colour is subsequently applied. So it may be that it's not possible to produce a mast in a kind of two-tone colour, but we may be able to find a wording which could either enable that to take place or to just go with all green, if that's what members propose.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Councillor Corwer.
Thank you, Chairman. Going back to the point that Councillor Abbs made earlier about not having sufficient information in front of us, I understand that we're involved in a project to do with 5G across the whole area from correspondence that I've had with an officer previously, and that there will be a map eventually of all masts with photographs, details, heights, etc. Are officers able to say when they anticipate that information will be available to councillors, so that we can use that information in future decision making?
Who'd like to take that question? Mr. Till, thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Councillor Culver. I'm afraid that I don't have the information on how soon that information will be available. The same emails that went to you were copied into me regarding the fact that that project is underway, but I haven't been advised any further on timescales for it, I'm afraid.
Thank you, everyone. I think that concludes the questions of officers. So we now move on to the debate. Who'd like to open the debate this evening on this one, please? Well done, Councillor Abbs. Break the
someone else step in first, please. Yeah, I'm really quite disappointed, actually. I'm disappointed that Hutchinson aren't here because we don't get to ask the right questions. We don't get to understand why they haven't been following policy. I think it's pretty clear they're not following the guidelines and the policy. And I'm also left a little bit confused. I think we're approving or meant to be approving the the need for planning permission. But I've got lost a bit in exactly what we're being asked to approve in the end. But I don't believe a word about checking out suitable alternatives, because I can see, industrial estates that are very close, 70, 80 metres away, that I can't think of a reason why they wouldn't be suitable, which was why I was asking the question about, if permitted rights exist, what do they exist to do? Is anybody's land? Why not on an industrial estate? If it was near my offices, I'd be really happy, because I'd get a nice clean 5G signal. So all in all, I'm really quite disgusted with the way they're treating the committee, having been requested to come here and just not attended. I'm very much minded to vote against it completely, but if we do end up voting for it, I certainly like Councillor Bennett's idea of a transition from green to silver, or green to blue, or whatever it would. I like the idea of blending it into the landscape. That works quite nicely for me, and I would like to see some kind of control around when they do the work, because we've had enough disasters with roadworks in and around the area of late. Hope that helps start the debate.
That's kicked us off. Good, well done. Councillor Wollaston.
Yes, going back to my earlier point, I accept if we do agree to accept this application, we can't condition it, but could we have an advisory that we'd like it to be investigated, whether it's scope to screen these boxes?
Yep. Councillor Culver.
Thank you, Chairman. I agree with Councillor Abbott. It is really disappointing that the applicant hasn't turned up, and I understand from other councillors that their communication with residents hasn't been particularly good. I think they should be encouraged to come along, and as we all around this table will know, that 9/10 of any problem that we have to deal with as councillors is to do with communication. If people communicate, and if they consult with people so that people understand why a decision is being made in the way that it is, as opposed to a different decision, that will often be acceptable to people, because they think, well, someone's bothered to consult me and explain to me why it has to be this way. So I would definitely second contacting them and saying that we really do encourage them to engage better with the community in future. And also in the update sheet, it mentions a potential condition from environmental health about the noise, and I would certainly support that condition. I think that should definitely go in. And I do think we need more information about this as members. I appreciate the fact we're not here to look at particular sites and we're not experts in that, but I do think this project that the council's looking at, where they're going to map things, would be really, really valuable to committees like this, so that we've got more information available to us.
Thank you, Councillor Culver. Members, just bear with me 1 minute. Thank you. Councillor Wollaston. Oh, you're still there. Okay, Councillor Barnett.
Well, Chairman, I've always been against many of these Mast for a period of time, although we're specifically discussing this one in question tonight. And obviously we're discussing it basically because we've received the 5 objections. And my main concern is that, are we going to be sitting around the table on a regular basis for further ones that are coming forward? And obviously there is going to be a certain amount coming forward, and once it gets out into the community that 5 objectors can actually be submitted to this council, and we will then be obliged to actually discuss that particular one. We are going to spend a lot of time discussing these particular masks when we've got very little power in our own hands in being able to really discuss it in some depth. And I feel I'm in some difficulty. It's a case of you're damned if you do, you're damned if you're not. And therefore, I'm obviously against it, but I realise it means nothing.
Councillor Kant.
Thank you, Chair. I must say that I think we're between a rock and a hard place. There doesn't seem to me to be any reasonable grounds on the very limited scope of things we're able to judge to refuse this, even if we were able to do that. However, I mean, I've had a long held belief that too much power has been given to large corporations to override local communities by placing masts in what can be very awkward, difficult and places which are eyesores. I'm very inclined to abstain from the vote on the basis I just object in principle to the rights they've been given.
Thank you. Back to Councillor Abbs.
Yeah, thank you very much. I listened to the debate. I think I'd like to put a proposal forward, especially as, when having reread what it says, that we are simply being asked to determine if prior approval is required. So I guess the answer is, yep, you've got to get approval for it. In my simplistic terms, come with some approval. That seems to be what it's saying here. The whole bit about it's a 15 metre. We're not approving the mast, unless I've misunderstood this. And therefore, I'm quite happy to basically say, no, we should, I think maybe we should get a clarity before I make the proposal from the officer. Is that correct? Application determine if prior approval is required for a proposed. And are we actually determining, yes, you must get prior approval? Is that actually what we're doing tonight?
Mrs. Cutts, would you like to answer or Mr. Till? Mr. Till's finger's on the button. I think he's ready to go with this one.
Good.
Thank you, Chairman. The prior approval process is a complex and confusing one. Yeah. In this particular case, there are two matters that may be required. Prior approval may be required in respect of, and those are the siting and the appearance of the equipment. The decision is essentially not whether you would be requiring prior approval. It's whether you would be refusing to grant prior approval if you were looking at refusing or being dissatisfied with the siting and appearance. That would then lead the developer, the operator, to need a planning application in order to have those matters considered.
Okay, then fantastic. Then therefore I would like to make the proposal that we in fact do say you need to put a full planning application in for this so it can be considered properly, and maybe they'll turn up next time. Yeah. I don't know if that's against officers' recommenders or with it, but
I'll take advice from legal on this one.
It is against officers' recommendation. Right. So we do need some reasons. I don't know if.
Well, the reasons are that there's a total lack of evidence being provided about siting and the suitability of alternate sites, and the appearance is unacceptable as they put forward in the presentation. And yes, we could, if we were doing it the other way around, put some conditions. But actually, I'm saying no, we reject it because they came forward with a silver box.
Sorry, Chair. As I understand, there's a very limited, and when you say citing, I think the citing seems to be used in too generic a sense. Citing doesn't mean we can say you can't have it on this site because we think there's appropriate reasons to refuse that site. We can only refuse to turn down certain very limited aspects of why it's on that site. Is that not the case? And that's because we go very limited things like the access, the proximity to the road, the very limited things. So we can't, if we go this route again, and even if you did have a full planning application, I think we'd be faced with the same issue. We cannot have a debate about whether that is the right site for it, which is what we'd like to do, I'm sure. I certainly would. However, I don't think that's feasible. I don't think Mr. Till meant that, did he?
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Cant. To clarify, I would, in respect of a reason for refusal due to lack of information on siting, I would want clarity regarding what information members don't have in terms of siting that is in respect of this particular site. What potential concerns regarding the siting here?
It's not so much the site, the reasons for against this site. It's basically the bland statement that basically says, "I know we considered some other places, but they weren't suitable." But there is no evidence And there's no reasoning behind why these were unacceptable. And so, even if you don't like that one, I'm really just quite happy to reject it based on we don't like the colour you've chosen, because that's appearance, and we're allowed to do that if we're rejecting it. And surely we're allowed to reject it on that reason alone.
Thank you, Chairman. I do have concerns regarding the citing reason for refusal, that it doesn't really relate to the specifics of this particular site. It's talking about alternative speculative sites. And in terms of appeal case law, we don't actually have case law to support authorities making a decision to pick between different sites. However, in terms of a reason for refusal based on appearance, if members have concerns that the appearance of the development is inappropriate and will result in a level of visual impact that is unacceptable, then that would directly relate to the visual appearance of this particular development, and as such, I would suggest is a stronger reason for refusal.
Then I'm happy to go forward with my recommendation to go against officer's recommendation on the basis that it is, as we've discussed many times, inappropriate appearance.
My only observation on this is that, again, at the site meeting, I think this was discussed slightly as to where else can it go. And I think we were advised, as we all know, on 5G, these masts are going to be very, very close to each other. It's not like
Chairman,
3G.
you're going back to location, and we've moved off that. I'm just talking about the colour.
This is on
sorry,
yeah.
no.
But with the location, the actual place that you can put these isn't very wide from that position when you look at the overall network. That's what I'm saying. If you move one, you start moving more about, because they are so close together. That was the information.
I understand, Chairman. I'm not an expert, so
okay,
I don't have information to judge one way or the other. We were going with what Mr. Till said. The stronger reason to be able to reject this, which is what I'm proposing, is basically on appearance.
Fine, that's fine. So, yeah, I just make that point that was brought up at the site meeting. Okay. Councillor Camp.
Sorry, Jack. I suppose we're going to go around a bend on this. As far as I can see, that's a very odd position to take, in the sense that presumably if this was a feasible basis for rejecting Mast, and I guess—
Chairman, may I raise a point of order?
Sorry.
If I may raise the point of order first, a proposal has been made. We have a little bit of a debate. The next logical step is to ask for a seconder, not to have debate about it.
I'm quite happy for a debate to continue after a proposal has been put. We've done that already this evening. Councillor Camp, please continue.
Thank you. As far as I see it, I assume if it was as simple as continually refusing the colour that was proposed for a mast, many other councils would have done that on the basis of supporting local residents in objecting to these damn great things appearing outside their front doors. I can't see we're going to succeed on an appeal with that. But if we are able to make a condition that the colour should be the one that's been suggested by Mr. Softly, for example, and the developers comply with that, presumably that satisfies it. Otherwise, it's just a gesture. I don't get the gesture.
If I may respond to that, then, Chairman,
cool.
You know, the applicant has made a specific request for appearance, and we're only two things we can consider it on. One of them we're saying isn't safe, and Simon, the officer, basically the stronger of the two, was on its appearance, and therefore I don't see any negativity in saying, is it really up for the planning committee to decide exactly what colour it be, how we merge it, blend it into the background? That's kind of outside our remit. How do I know exactly what colour green, rel colour, silver it should be, or anything of that nature? You know, I can make suggestions, but that's me thinking of a solution, or rather, Councillor Bennett was thinking of a good solution on the fly. Here, we have a proposal from the developer, you know, which we're saying no.
Thank you. Any more debate? Otherwise, I am looking for a second, and this is against officer's recommendation. Do I have a second? I don't. Is there an alternative proposal, please? A proposer for going with officer's recommendation? Councillor Bennett, Councillor Wollaston, thank you. And do I have a second to go with officer's recommendation? Councillor Bennyworth, thank you. So we have here some conditions which I'd like now to capture, and the ones that we have discussed, in my opinion, and the officer and our legal advisor will confirm, was a colour. And I think Mrs. Cutts did say that a colour suggestion could be submitted, so as a response could be made as to this phasing from green to silver to blue, whatever we decide tonight. Noise, but I think Mr. Till will advise me on that, is set down by the regulation anyway, which I don't think we've had any say on. And the other one was from, I think, Councillor Wollaston, with regards to, we put a missive in that in future consideration is given for screening. Am I right?
Yes, I was suggesting advisory, Chairman, rather than condition.
Advisory, yeah. I will now go back to Mr. Till and Mrs. Cutts and Mrs. Armour, just to make sure I've collected all those, or are there any more? Mr. Till first.
Thank you, Chairman. I would like to comment regarding the noise condition, that the matters that we're being asked to consider are sighting and appearance, and as that doesn't relate to either of those matters, it couldn't be conditioned on this notification. In respect of the other matters, yes, I've noticed, I've noted colour as a condition, and I would suggest that there's an accompanying informative that gives the operator an idea of the tonal change that we're seeking in terms of colour, and ask them to provide information in respect to that, and an informative in respect of screening at ground level for the equipment cabinet as well, Chairman.
Thank you. I'll take advice from Mrs. Armour here. I have a proposal and a second. I do have the conditions. I have two hands up. Councillor Bennyworth and Councillor Cant. I don't know if they're old hands or new hands, but I will take advice. If it's to add more conditions, I don't think we can now.
Forgive me. I wonder if we were able to, as part of that condition on colour, to ask the developer to consult the local community about on the final colour. Is it possible to do that?
Chairman, might I suggest that as part of the informative, it's recommended that the town council are approached with the details and asked for feedback.
Thank you. Councillor Bennyworth.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, the colour grading, you touched on that. Happy with that. Also, just want to say that if we can convey the disappointment of this committee to the applicant, agent, whoever it might be, they haven't turned up. They held this committee in some form of contempt, in my mind. If they were here, they might have been able to answer some of the questions that we've been wrestling with this evening. If we can just make sure that we do that, I'd be grateful.
Mrs. Armour, are you happy that that's added at this stage?
Well, I'm happy if the proposer and seconder are happy, because they're the ones that have made the proposal. So I think it is up to them to decide the conditions. Councillor Beck's also got his hand raised.
Councillor Beck.
Thank you, Chairman. I trust I haven't got this incorrect, but I believe Simon Till is recommending that we do not put in any sort of recommendation or condition or whatever you like to call it with regard to noise from the cabinets. To actually quote from a previous councillor with many years' experience on this planning committee, Councillor Rolls, he used to say, a favourite saying of his was, "Where's the harm?" What is wrong with us putting that in? As I mentioned before, I personally have been advised that nuisance value from these noise emanated from these cabinets does actually happen. Not necessarily in every case, but you know, it is a reality. It's not a myth. So where's the harm in us putting this condition in?
Thank you.
We are protecting the residents.
Thank you. I don't want to extend this debate anymore. Now we've got a proposal and second, but I think a quick comeback from Mr. Till. This would be an environmental issue, would it not?
Thank you, Chairman. The harm is that the legislation doesn't permit the committee to control environmental nuisance such as noise arising from the cabinets.
Thank you. I'm now going to move on to the vote. So I do have a proposer, Councillor Wollaston, and a seconder, Councillor Bennyworth. And the recommendation is for Heading and Planning Countryside be authorised to grant permission for application 22/10643. This is for the installation of this new 15-metre monopole tower to support antennae, associated radio equipment housing and ancillary development hitherto. Mrs. Armour, would you please conduct the vote, please?
Can I just check that the proposer and seconder are happy with the conditions that have been discussed?
Yes, Chairman.
Okay, so those in favour, sorry. So those in favour of officer's recommendation, which is to grant prior approval for the siting and appearance, can you raise your hands? That's 3, and those against? So that proposal then has failed.
Thank you. I'm now looking for an alternative proposal.
Same again?
You need, I think if you need to.
Well, I'm not sure.
I'm
obviously to reject officer's recommendations because
thank you.
At the end of the day,
that's all I'm looking for. Yeah. And do I have a second? Councillor Vickers. So the recommendation now is for Head of Planning and Countryside be authorised to refuse the said application as previous.
We do need reasons, though. I'm sorry.
We do need the reasons.
And the reason would be the one
the
that's,
appearance again.
The appearance as per the officer's advice.
Just that single.
Well, I mean, that was the advice was that the other one was not really appropriate. So
I think it wasn't appropriate in the wider context, but I guess if there's something wrong with the siting on that corner, visibility or people seeing it, I haven't been on site, but.
For me, it's difficult to argue the type of device that was putting in and it's interfering with the people walking by it. So I can't see the displays. Mr. Gardarder was clear on that being affected, and I can't see pedestrians being interfered with as they walk by. So I'm reluctant if we can't considering its location in a wider context to do anything else except for the one condition, which was appearance.
Mr. Till.
Thank you, Chairman. In respect of the appearance, I think it's important to clarify what in particular members' concerns are. Is it visual prominence in the street scene, for example? Is it and this may relate to siting, that the siting contributes to the visual prominence in the street scene and a detriment to the appearance of the street scene?
Yeah, I mean, we could put the lack of camouflaging of the in this location leads to a direct loss of visual amenity to the local residents. And so alternate locations would have may well have allowed a silver to go forward, but in this location, given its visual prominence in the seat stream, I don't see how it can be that colour. No thought was given. So,
Councillor Beck.
Thank you, Chairman. Simon Till has actually sort of just pointed out that we can, if I'm assuming I've got this correct, we cannot also refer to the siting as the resident John Softly pointed out in response to Paul Goddard's comment about the siting of the pole. Coming from the one direction, the trees do actually provide a certain camouflage cover. But coming, as you might say, up the hill from Kill Road area, it is absolutely bang smack in your face. And also coming up from Gaywood Drive, it's bang smack in your face. It really is. It's you have to experience.
I think we appreciate that
these installations
from the
at
site
other
meeting.
sites
We
to
appreciate that from the site
what,
meeting.
what it may be like.
Thank you. So again, Mrs. Armour and Mr. Till, are we happy with the objections? These are most important because if this is going to go anywhere, we're going to need quite a strong base of argument.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm satisfied that the members have been clear in terms of describing what their concerns in relation to the visual impacts associated with the siting of the equipment and its appearance in the street scene are.
Members, I'm now going to put the new proposal that's been put on the table by Councillor Abbs and seconded by Councillor Vickers. The recommendation for Head of Planning Countryside be authorised to refuse the planning application for this 15-metre monopole in Stony Lane and Turnpike Road. Mrs. Armour, would you please conduct the vote, please?
Okay, so those in favour of refusing the prior approval, please raise your hands. It's fine. Those against? So the proposal's carried then.
Then that application has been refused. Members, interesting evening. Thank you all very much for your comments. Interesting debate. That concludes the business this evening, and I close this meeting at 8:20. Thank you. Just remain in your place until the Zoom has been closed.